Welcome to Elevation 740. Today I have Tobe Finch, Happy Day President. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I'm wondering what you had for breakfast.
Yeah, well, I'm not a big breakfast eater. You know, usually starts out with a cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. If there's a cookie in the house or something like that, I mean, I will cheat, you know.
I do cookies in the morning too.
Yeah.
But you're the restaurant guy in town and you don't have breakfast.
Well, maybe on a Saturday or a Sunday or something like that, but usually I'm moving too quick.
So have you always been in the restaurant industry? Was this like a preordained conclusion that you were going to be in food?
Well, maybe in God's eyes, but in mine it wasn't. I mean, at 13 I was in our restaurants. You know, I mean, that's when I started. Mm-hmm. And it was not my favorite job.
So what did you do when you were 13?
I worked at Lewis and Taco Time. You know, I went in the morning, I'd prep crustos, I'd work through lunch, and then I'd walk home. And I mean, it was good. You know, I had a job, I made some money, but it was not necessarily what I saw for my future.
So then how did you end up here as the president of the corporation?
Well, in my 20s, when I was graduating from college, I needed a job, and I was living in Pullman, and it was available, you know, and I was kind of like, I was kind of fighting against it, like, I don't know if this is what I want to do. And I had a pastor that was in my life, and he's like, I think you need to give that another look. And so I did, and I really found like I loved it. I loved managing. I loved the people part of the business. And
so what was your first job there at 20 when you actually joined the company?
Well, I managed Pullman Taco Time.
Okay.
So I did that for 3 years, and then I moved over into Moscow, and I managed Moscow Arby's for 7 years. And then, you know, I just needed a transition at the end of that job, and that's when I moved to Lewiston and took over the catering business.
Excellent. So how did Happy Day start to where you are now?
Well, it started, you know, my dad was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He was a welding instructor. I don't think he really liked that very much. Mm-hmm. And Taco Time was a new concept. They'd been to one, I think, in Coeur d'Alene or Spokane or something like that. And my dad was telling my grandpa, you need to open a Taco Time. You know, he was pretty excited about it.
Taco Time is awesome. It's
Yeah.
actually the reason I never became a vegetarian.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, no, I did not.
Oh, those tacos. So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. So anyway, my grandpa said, well, you should be the one to do it. And so they opened 3 Taco Times, and my mom was going to run them, and then she got pregnant with me. And so my dad never went back to teaching.
So then you started your family started with those 3, and now where are you at?
Well, there's a whole timeline, but
Right.
Now we have 14 restaurants and, I don't know, 8 brands, 9 brands,
Mm-hmm.
Some quick serve. You know, we have 5 independent restaurants.
And what's your favorite? Like if you had to pick, I'm going to go to one of my restaurants tonight, which one would it be and why?
Well, I don't know if I have usually it's kind of like a season. You know, it's like there's a season where I'm really into, you know, I'm into Taco Time, or there's a season I might be into Arby's, or there's a season we're going out to Tomato Brothers all the time, or kind of the same thing with food too. Like I'll eat something to death and I'm like, okay, I don't want to eat that. And I might go a year and a half or so and never order that item again. But
So what is some of the big challenges that you face running the company? Have you seen issues around supply? Have you seen, what have been some of the things that you've had to tackle?
Well, between supply chain or between, you know, just, probably workforce has been a big challenge for us.
And how's that been impacting you?
Well, I think, you know, in 2022, it was like, wow, buckle up. We were doing everything we could to hire people but there's been a real shift in the culture too. We've really tried to be a lot more intentional with our employees. And this has been probably one of the reasons why I got into the business is really people development. You know, how do we grow our team members, you know, the people that are in our businesses to be, to prosper, you know, and how does that grow our company or help grow our community?
So let's talk about food specifically, because I know that you have a story and some things that you're working on right now. So how did that come about, and what are you up to?
Okay, well, this has been a wild ride. In 2017, my brother, I was transitioning out of catering. I'd been for years. I'd been trying to figure out, well, how am I going to get out of catering?
You didn't like catering?
No, I love catering.
Oh, okay.
But I could see, there's got to come a time where I'm going to lift this company off my dad's shoulders, and I didn't want to receive it in a day. I needed time with him and time for our company to adjust to my leadership and whatnot. So anyway, in 2017, I'm making that transition, and my brother is talking to me about this gentleman, John Paul Jackson, who is this prophetic guy who had been speaking in churches, and he had been talking about this thing called a perfect storm. He goes, he said, in the next decade, there's coming to the United States a storm. He goes, it'll be political, it'll be pestilence, it'll be economic, it'll be weather, and he goes, all these factors will converge at one time. And well, the part my brother's talking about, he goes, Tobe, there's going to be food shortages, there's going to be, it's going to cause all these problems. He goes, we
and this was in 2017 before COVID.
Right. And I'm going, and he's like, well, we need to learn how to grow our own food. And I go, what? I don't know how that would even happen. I don't even have the bandwidth for that. What am I going to go do? Start a farm? I mean, this is crazy, right? In fact, when I order the food shows up. Right. We had one vendor that supplied pretty much all of our restaurants. And then 2020 showed up. And June of 2020 was our first food shortage, and our ground beef prices spiked. We were just struggling to get it. We kind of started stockpiling ground beef so that our taco times could, no ground beef, no taco, no taco times.
Right. And did you ever get to a point where you were just out, and someone shows up if I wanted to get my taco at taco time, that just wasn't going to happen? No. But we have had product lines like that. That have been out, and thankfully not drastically detrimental to our business. But they're all things to me that I feel like God has kind of positioned us like it's time to wake up. It's time to do something and not wait for something else to happen. So that's kind of where this journey started. I would say after June of 2020, it all kind of washed out and recovered and whatnot. But by the end of the year, and I'd been kind of leaning into my faith, going, hey, I just really feel like I'd become, I don't know, it had been in an ineffective part of my life, and I was really challenged. Like, in my 20s, I wanted to be a pastor, and by the time I'm here now, I'm like, I'm not even saying the name of Jesus in public. Right. And I really felt challenged by that. And so by the end of 2020, I'm up every morning because I've listened to the narratives. I've watched what's happening in COVID. I've watched all these restaurants. And the perfect storm hasn't happened yet.
It is not.
It hasn't. So you're still kind of anticipating that this might happen, but you're not 100% sure.
Yeah, I call them kind of like birth pangs. Like we've seen this type of stuff happening. We've seen intensity growing, but by the end of 2020, I'm every morning up praying about this. I'm really concerned about what I'm seeing happening in the nation and just in the world around. And in 2021, January 2021, I remember the day, and I felt like God just dropped it right in me, and He said, "Prepare, it's coming." And I walked into our corporate office to our corporate chef. And I said, I go, Frank, we're going to buy a ton of food. And I told him the whole story, and he had the faith to believe with me.
And what does a ton of food mean? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, when we placed the order, it was the largest food order we'd ever placed.
Wow.
And I think we spent about $150,000 on food. We built a big 30 by 40 freezer in a warehouse we had in North Lewiston. And we just figured, listen, let's just buy the product lines to make sure that we don't run out of if there's shortages on anything. And I knew, like, there was a sense of urgency about it, and I was kind of like, I knew that it could sound crazy, but I knew God had spoken that to us. And our distributor is kind of like, what are you guys thinking?
Like, you're crazy.
You're crazy, yeah. And But then the driver showed up. Maybe they showed up about a month later, month and a half, 2 months later, and they said, we all thought you guys were crazy. You're not crazy. There are outages on just about every delivery we're making.
Wow.
And that was kind of the beginning. Like God gave us a lot of assurance, and these were the times where I'm like, some people could go, well, how do you really know it was God? And I go, well, I mean, I just have had enough divine appointments and enough, even the word perfect storm got spoken back to us like so many times. It was in the papers all the time.
I've seen your wall. There's a wall of different, it's like a perfect storm montage.
Right. And I was in a business in town. I was telling this story, and I could tell he was looking at me like, okay, this sounds a little strange. You're talking about a prophet. That sounds strange to me. And I go, and I knew it all did. And I was okay with sounding a little strange because I'm like, well, how do you tell somebody else if something that sounds a little crazy if you don't tell them? And that's fine. But the very next day after I'm leaving, and I could tell he's like, hey, say hello to your parents. It was good to talk with you. Kind of like, I'm done. Anyway, very next day, front page of the paper, weathering a perfect storm, and I'm flipping out. I'm like, Alicia, and so I know the conversation now in 2021. Though I'm like in 2024, it seems it's less. There was no cloud in the sky in January of 2021, even maybe through kind of the first half of the year. But now you begin to see, oh wow, well we've had tremendous weather in the nation. Supply chains and food consolidations have continued. So you bought all this food. Yep.
Turns out you were right. You needed to do that in order to protect your supply chain. What's happened? So are you just continuing to order copious amounts of food? Is that the answer here?
No. So then I was invited to this. I had a friend he's a real estate investor, and he invited me to this property he was looking at. Must have been March of 2021. And I said, sure, I'll come see it with you. So we walk into this warehouse, and he is like, Tobe, do you know what they're asking for this? In the center of town, you cannot find property like this. And it's almost like he's prophesying to me. He didn't even know it, but it is lighting me up. I have all this vision show up in me, and I'm like, I have to have this space.
What's the vision? What are you thinking at this point?
Well, I don't even know if I fully saw it. I just knew, I knew that, I mean, I could see food production, I could see commissary, I could see center of town, how all of that was a real strength. But probably it was 2 hours later, I'm in my corporate office, and our corporate chef walks in again, and I'm like, Frank, I am flipping out. And I start telling him about, I was just in this warehouse, I've got all this vision, and he interrupts me, and he goes, well, you know the place I've been praying we should buy? And I go, no, what? Draws all the surrounding buildings, the roads, and he points back, and he goes, this one right back here. And I go, Frank, I was just there 2 hours ago.
Wow.
Which is crazy because we give a lot of tours, and most people that come say, I totally forgot this building was even here.
Right, people don't even know where it is.
Right.
Because it's all the way back around Winco, and
right.
And you kind of have to give people extra directions to get there.
Right. So anyway, those were the kind of the beginning confirmations that we had. I mean, there's been so many other just divine appointment type things where it's like, well, if you know, right? And we have been affirmed along the way. It's helped us through this time of inflation. We've had a place where we could really push on pricing and just make big buys. But inside the warehouse, we will have and we already do. We already have our own butcher. We're buying local beef. We've got our own hanging room, processing facility. In fact, today I think it's in its final leg of USDA inspection.
Wow. So
we'll be able to be a wholesaler as well.
So tell me then, why is that important for food distribution here? Like, what's the difference between having your own place versus all the buying that you've been doing? What's the big difference there?
Well, one thing that we saw that distribution would give the community is it would give the community a place if our community came together and began to produce local food. it would become a place to receive.
Mm-hmm.
And once you receive it, it gets organized, gets cataloged, gets put back out into the marketplace where now restaurants or whoever, and I like to say we see it as a wholesale operation. It's not it will not, that location is not a retail operation.
Right.
So it gives it the ability to find a marketplace, whether it's inside our community, region, or further out. It's a place where we could receive goods.
So basically, so if I'm understanding the concept here, right now, if you go through any of the other traditional distributors, you're getting food from probably California, you're getting it from all over the place. What you're talking about is making that hub here. So what we're eating and consuming here is actually coming from a much more localized area.
That is the vision. However that kind of materializes, you know, I'm not necessarily sure. I'm not opposed to, one of the things we're seeing in supply chain is that there's other food hubs out there. Even our distribution facilities that we're currently buying from, you know, we've been able to make big buys, so that's been helpful. Right now, we just see problems in the supply chain. So, however the transition works from, you know, long distance food to local food, we want to be.
You want to be part of that.
We want to be part of that. We
Right.
want to help that.
Right.
And nor do I want to demonize the food that's coming long distance. I
Right.
just see right now that with all the things that have happened in the world, from regulations to fuel to, there's just a lot of turmoil, weather, whatever that could affect that supply chain.
Well, and you talked about before that it's not demonizing, it's also local food dollars.
Right.
So for example, if you have food products that are coming from California, well, that money is now going back to California.
Right.
Wouldn't it be better for that money to stay here
Right.
locally and support the industries in the local
Yes.
community here?
Yes.
And that's what you're trying to do,
Yes.
essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. We see, you know, we hear the stories of the ranchers that, they're selling, they're getting out of the business, or we hear the story of the farmers that are, you know, they're closing up their family farms or things like that. And I go, why aren't those places abundant?
Right.
You know, without food, we don't exist. Right. So it is a foundation to the economy. You won't buy a car if you can't get a meal.
Right.
Right. You'll pay more because you need it.
Right.
You know.
So you're basically trying to get the distribution network and to get this to be an abundant food network here.
Right. Yes.
So the distribution aspect of what you're doing sounds really important. But I also know that you're interested in clean food. Can you tell me a little bit more about your foray into that area?
Well, I think this was part of the journey. I kind of tell people, I go, there's no halo on my head about clean food, right? I mean, if you looked in my cupboards at home, you might go,
Oh, you mean it's not
right?
all organic?
No, we're not there yet. But one of the things we see is that local food is clean. And during this process, I've learned so much from so many different people, and it really resonates with me with what I believe God is doing, which is kind of bringing reformation to the food supply.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you talk about clean food because, so I have an experience also with clean food. So when you were talking about that, I was like, yes. So a lot of people don't know that I have a kidney disease, and it's not really something that impacts my life all that much, except it does impact the way that I eat. So I go through the trajectory of my life, and I see a nephrologist every year to check my vitals and just make sure my kidneys are still okay. So there was one year that my nephrologist called me after my routine checks. And my nephrologist, by the way, never calls me. So when he calls me, I'm like, oh no, now I'm in like stage 2. I've like really done something terrible. And he calls me and he says, Linnea, what have you done? And I said, what do you mean, what have I done? Your vitals and everything improved. I've been practicing medicine for a long time and you never see that. I need to know what you did.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, this was the year that I joined a CSA program, which is Community Supported Agriculture. So I was getting this basket with my friend of whatever was grown in season. And I'm not the greatest cook at this point in my life. And so it was really an effort to try to figure out how to cook these different products. And so I also at that time decided, Well, if my grandmother didn't eat it, then it's probably not good for me either. And so up until that point, I had been conscious of what I was eating from a sodium intake because of my kidneys. But I also decided that I would only buy products if I knew what the ingredients were on the label. And if my grandmother didn't know what they were, and I made an exception for about 3 of them, but if my grandmother didn't know what they were, I wasn't going to buy it. It pretty much eliminated half the grocery store.
Wow.
But through that year and of the kind of like turning over this idea of changing the way that I was eating. And again, it wasn't just like organic, it was more just being conscious of the types of food that I'm eating and eating more whole foods and the CSA basket. And it actually improved my kidney function to the point where my nephrologist said, in the 30 years that he's practiced medicine, he's never seen anything like
Wow.
this.
That is, I mean, we've been hearing a lot of that about food as medicine.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the national stage right now. I mean, that's what's being discussed.
Right. So I just think that what you're doing is really exciting, and I'm excited to see where this goes. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your vision, sharing your story. And thank you also to our viewers for watching. We'll see you next time on Elevation 740.